In this video, we're going to do a really basic introduction to the program Adobe Camera Raw. So I'm going to go ahead and open up this demo Adobe Camera Raw folder. And so once we are in Adobe Bridge, it's designed to work really as a companion program with Adobe Photoshop and Adobe Camera Raw. Adobe Camera Raw is a sub-program in Photoshop, but it's a sub-program in Photoshop that's really designed to quite elegantly work with raw files. So let's go to this very first one we have right now, which is white balance. Now you'll notice this image is facing the wrong direction. There's a couple ways of correcting that. We're going to first show you how to do it in Bridge, because that's sort of an easier way when you're working through things in a way than doing them in Camera Raw. You can just do it right up here. This little rotate counterclockwise, it's rotated, you're pretty good to go. Okay, once you are on this image, right next to these rotations, you'll see this little aperture icon. This is the icon for Camera Raw. Adobe's version of Camera Raw. So you'll go ahead and click on that. That'll automatically open you up into this program here. So Camera Raw, this is version 17.5, updated fairly recently. So, okay, when this opens up, it'll automatically put you in this little default panel. This default is the Basics panel, which basically is just doing general edits to your photograph. Anything from correcting exposure, correcting white balance, correcting, making, black and white conversion, doing sharpening, that kind of thing. So we're going to kind of go through this panel and showing you on images one at a time. So first of all, we have some basic profiles. Now, you have a raw file, right? So you have some basics kind of built into this one. First of all, is it exposed correctly? You can look at the contrast, highlights, black and whites, etc. So under color, right, when we click right down here, we have white balance. Now, because this is a raw file, you have a lot of presets that are built in here. I don't usually bother adjusting white balance too much in camera if I know I'm shooting raw files, because all the presets are already pre-recorded for that. So now this one, I'm guessing, is probably shot under tungsten light. Sure enough. If I go ahead and click here, it's done a pretty good job of white balancing this. Now, something else you can do, if you don't want to use one of these presets, there's this little eyedropper right here. If I go ahead and click on that eyedropper, and I click on something that's white, that's going to give me a pretty neutral, way to work with this image. So now anything white or gray is going to balance for the white or gray in the image. It's going to know to look for white or gray and remove any color that's laying on top of that. The effect of that is white balancing the whole image. If it's not perfect, once you do that, you can also fine tune it. So 3200 is what this is set for now, and we can kind of use the slider and warm it up or cool it down if we think it needs to be slightly different than it is. So we can do a custom one like we're doing right now, again, or you can do one of the presets. We could also do auto. Auto is also going to do a pretty good job with this one. It's just slightly warmer than the other version. So again, you have the option of using the eyedropper to do white balancing or working through it this way. All right, now once you're done making edits to this photograph, we have some options down here. We have Open. This will open it in Photoshop. We have Cancel, which is dismissing it without doing any changes. Or we have Done. So Done will apply the changes already, right? It won't open the image, but it will apply the changes you've done in Camera Raw. And you can see that that's happened. Now, two things have happened right here. Right now, under View, I have this as showing hidden files. If I unclick that, that little view will go away. So if I click the Show Hidden Files again, this little XMP file showed up right here, right? This was created, and it's the instructions for how this CR2 file should open. As long as this XMP file is in the same proximity, in the same folder as this image, this adjustment will be kept. So, and you can see there's an adjustment made because this little icon is now showed up on top. Now, if I was to take this and throw it away, right, put it in the trash, now those changes revert back to what it was before. So one note, if you are changing your raw files in this way, just make sure the XMP file travels with it, because again, that's instructing it how it's supposed to open and how it's supposed to look. Until you make a new version of this file, a TIFF file, a JPEG, something like that. This is the as shot by camera. That's going to be unaltered. The XMP file is just instructions on how it's supposed to look. So I'm going to undo that, bring the XMP file back, and you see my changes are now going to be updated with that one. So let's do another white balance here. Go ahead and click the image. You can either double click. So depending on how you recently viewed this photograph, say you were editing in Photoshop, it'll open in Photoshop. If you were editing in something like Camera Raw, it'll open in Camera Raw. Now, this is a JPEG file. It's not a RAW file, but we still have the option of editing it in Camera Raw. So I'll show you the difference. So I'll go ahead and say Camera Raw. And now notice here, under white balance, there's no presets. It's not a raw file, so none of that is pre-recorded. You either have to do it manually, or you can do it with, you know, the eyedropper the way that we did here, or do a custom and kind of, you know, change as needed. So when I say done, right, this is going to be a permanent change that applies to the photograph. There is not going to be an XMP file that's made. So that's a permanent alteration, a destructive alteration I've now made on that file. So just so you know, we've talked a little bit about destructive and non-destructive files in the readings. Just kind of remember when you're editing raw files, you're making non-destructive changes or edits to the photographs. As long as they remain raw files, these raw files are not going to be affected by the changes you make. The original image is still in there, preserved. With JPEG files, any alteration you make to them is going to be relatively permanent. So we'll go through just one more here for white balance, so you can see the result. This one again, we have all of these options. Is this probably tungsten light for interior? Nope. Let's go ahead and try open shade. We'll try daylight. Daylight is giving us probably the closest look here. Now this probably isn't just a white wall, so doing a white balance for the white wall might come out a little unnaturally cool. So if we warm that up a little bit, that's probably a little bit more accurate for what we're doing here. So go ahead and press done. That will save the changes. Okay, so some more you could do here. Let's go try an exposure adjustment here. Okay, so for this image, obviously very underexposed. So we're going to make sure to start with this light palette right here. Now you have some options. There's auto, black and white, or HDR. We can try an auto and see what happens. That gets us pretty close. I can just unclick it to see the change. But remember, we're looking at the histograms up here. You've gone through the histogram lecture, so you kind of know what the histogram is and how it's working in camera. So when you're editing, it's also a pretty good idea to look at the histogram to see what's happening here. This is going to give you a little warning on highlight clipping, right? If there's some areas where you have whites that aren't coming back, that's going to be showing you this. This is going to be shadow clipping up here and give you a little warning for that. So most things are fitting pretty comfortably now in this window. There are some dark areas through here we can work at. So now that you've done an auto, you either can start with that, or you can go ahead and just try some of these manual corrections yourself. So this already brought things down a little bit, right? And you can see I have this thing selected here. I can also click this one here. And this is showing me when I'm clipping highlights. To unclick that if it's distracting, but it's showing you where you're starting to lose those pixels or lose that data. So I find it a good idea to have this on just as a reminder to myself when I'm working, that I don't go too far with this and kind of removing the data. So we can first adjust just for the general exposure you think is correct. We can also adjust these things separately. So we can go ahead and move the highlights all the way down here. We can move shadows up a bit if you wanted to show more of this interior. I think that's pretty good. We can also adjust whites and darks overall separately. So this is just the general lights in the photograph. This is the highlights specifically. These are the shadows specifically, and these are the general dark tones in the photograph, which, you know, there's some overlap. So again, once you think you have a pretty good general here, let's click our warning. Everything is fine. We haven't lost any pixels. you can also do a slight adjustment here, right? But notice when I go too far, it's starting to show me that I'm getting some of the darks, and they're going out of the range here of what can be shown in that pixel area. So that's pretty good. Once you have it overall, generally giving you the level of lights and darks that you want, you can kind of go on and make further adjustments. Once you're done working on it for now, we're done. So let's do one more here. And this is a DNG file, so it's been converted from its original .cr2 file to DNG. So there's not going to be an XMP file for this. With DNG files, it's going through Photoshop. They're going to be loaded through here. So it's going to automatically open right here in Camera Raw, but again through Photoshop. Okay, so this image right here, we can first do an auto. That did a pretty good job of recovering some of the shadow information. I still would go further on the highlights to bring those down a little bit. So once you kind of do highlight and shadow recovery through here, I bring shadows up just a little bit more. Maybe just adjust contrast slightly. There are some other ways of working with this with masking. This is just to give you kind of a very easy general adjustment here in this light panel. So here's, I can turn this on and off, toggle the visibility to see what we've done, what changes you've made. If you've gone too far with it, again, we can go ahead and press done. Stop quits. There we go. So this now you can see there's not going to be an additional XMP file right here that shows up next to this. It's going to be embedded now because it's a DNG file. So this NEF file is Nikon's version of RAW. Let's go ahead and open that in Camera Raw. Alright, so this is showing you the shadow clipping. I'm going to go ahead and turn this off because it's a little distracting. So let's go ahead and try an auto. Right? It's still giving us, it's much better overall, but still giving us some information down here. So this one, we've done an exposure adjustment. I am going to go ahead and zoom in a little bit here so you can see like exactly how how noisy this image is, right? So you have a lot of sampling error and image noise. Anytime you do a pretty big exposure adjustment right now, especially when underexposed areas, you're going to see a definite increase in image noise show up from that adjustment. So we've done almost a 3-stop exposure. That's huge in terms of this image, and it's going to definitely increase the noise level in the image. It's actually only shot at ISO 200, so the noise level is coming from the exposure change that was made from the student's photograph. So there's some ways of mitigating that later. For now, I'm going to say done, and we can come back to that one. Okay, these ones, let's go. Okay, and now I want to show you a little bit of the differences between RAW files and JPEG files in terms of the information and recovery. So we're going to open up this RAW file first, and I'm going to go ahead and do an auto exposure adjustment, right? So we're looking at this highlight information especially. So right now, on auto, we brought some of this back. I'm going to go ahead and bring that all the way down. And notice when I zoom in right here, there's nice clean gradients, right? We've recovered all of that information back pretty successfully up here. So I'm going to go ahead and say done. And I'm going to open up this JPEG version. Notice it made the little XMP file. I'm going to go ahead and make this JPEG file open up in Camera Raw. And I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to go ahead and say auto. I'm going to click in here, and I'm going to show you in the highlights. So notice it's applying kind of an even, just gray tone across this. It's not giving us those nice subtle gradients anymore. And look at what's happening right here, right? You see that this banding effect that's happening? It's subtle, but it's definitely there. This is basically making this JPEG file pushed a little bit farther than the pixel information that's been embedded in here. You have a lot more highlight and shadow information that's available in the RAW version of the file than you can see in this JPEG version. So if I make that change in the JPEG, it's going to create this kind of banding effect. If I push it really far, it's going to go even further. So even though that was only pretty subtle, We only changed basically a stop difference here. We've already lost that in the JPEG, but it was retained in the raw file. Okay. All right, so coming up here, we have some more. So we've done all the basic exposure adjustments here. We can go do an auto, retain some of that information to start with. We have the color balance settings we've gone through already. We also have some details, right? You can do, this is a little bit soft. We can do some sharpening for the photograph if we want to. It's already automatically adding some sharpening to it. I usually zoom in a little bit when I do this. Right, so let's do some sharpening through here. But when we do sharpening, notice it adds, increased contrast, especially in these areas in between lights and darks, these high contrast areas. So let's see. So we have a little bit of, fringing that's happening around the edges right here. We can now do defringe a little bit. There's this sort of little kind of halo effect that's happening through here. So we can add a little bit of defringing through here. That's going to auto-correct some of that. We can also remove some of the chromatic aberrations right here that show up through here from this lens that was used. So we have, a few different options through here. That was a good place to start with this one. There used to be some other effects you can add right here. We have texture, clarity, dehaze, vignette. This image, there was, it looks like some clarity, it has some issues right here. It looks a little bit funny in terms of that. So clarity is something basically, if you want to add a softening effect, I almost never add positive clarity. Positive clarity, basically, it's a combination of increasing the overall contrast of an image and doing sharpening. So it's doing those two things for clarity. So sometimes if an image has this little effect, I'll just decrease clarity just slightly, kind of soften a little bit to change the effect. That's one way you can kind of work through that. Okay, go to cancel this one for clarity. All right, vibrance. Now, vibrance is something I actually do tend to like in my image. So vibrance, it is not just increasing saturation, right, which increases overall all of the saturation and all of the colors. Vibrance can just kind of target more of the muted tones. It's a little bit more subtle, right? So if you are going to use this, just do it really subtly. You can add basically a little bit more color saturation to the more muted tones, and it leaves more of the already vibrant tones alone. So that's just, you can kind of toggle off the visibility there. You can just do a subtle increase in the vibrance of a photograph this way. Okay, we have a few vibrance. Okay, with white balance, we pretty much already targeted this tool. I'll just show you one more time for effect. All right, so white balance, again, we have as shot. This is daylight. Daylight's going to give you a pretty good adjustment here. Let's go back to as shot and go again, click on here. Now what you're looking for here, I've showed you how to do white balance in white. You can also do it in anything that's neutral gray. So even though these things look kind of gray, it's reflecting the sky, it's sort of bluish, that's probably not going to work. Concrete is a little bit too warm in tone. But I can use some of these cars over here, right? So if I click on this car, yeah, that's gonna, that gray car in the background, or this white car over here. Oops, didn't quite get the car. There we go. Those are gonna give you, depending on the exact tone of the car, it's gonna get a little bit closer, right? But again, because you're using Camera Raw, you do have all of these presets. If you're using JPEG, it's more important to work with that. So this is a, under the daylight setting, it's gonna give you a pretty good result overall. So white balance. Okay. So let's do some targeted adjustments with this one. So this is an example where it was exposed mostly for the exterior, but the inside of this is just way too dark overall. So in this case, I would probably target shadows and just bring those up. you can see there's way more than a stop of information in the shadow areas, and we're seeing it one time. This is, again, the primary advantage of using raw files. You have, this great ability to, get information and extract it back out of your images that wasn't there in the beginning. Once we've done that, we want to kind of go through and play a little bit with contrast. You also probably want to bring down the highlights a little bit. You want to see some information there, but still, have it be dark enough where you can see that there's a difference. But we've managed to retain a lot of information there. Oops. All right, let's go back up here. Okay, targeted adjustments, cropping. One of the really nice things about Adobe Camera Raw and working with raw files in general is you can do non-destructive cropping. So here's an example where this was just shot really awkwardly, right? This is something you might want to try to eliminate altogether. We can try it through cropping. So we've kind of gone through most of the options through here. We'll go through a few more of the noise reduction and things later. For now, we're going to go to this next little panel up on top, which is the crop panel. So there's a few ways of working with the crop panel. You can do just a basic crop, right, where you maintain the image proportions. If you grab the edge like this, it will maintain proportions and just scale down. If you just grab one of these, right, depending on the preference that you had, so you have preset that's locked. If we do full, it lets you kind of go through full frame. We can unlock this to change the aspect ratio. So now we're no longer having constrained proportions. But again, be a little bit careful with this because it's kind of easy to make something that, is a little bit unnaturally wide or something. It doesn't quite fit into your parameters. So if you constrain the proportions, that's going to be a little easier in letting you kind of scale up and down without changing that. All right, so we have the full again. Let's go again, scale down a little bit here. And then you can kind of change a little bit how this is going to work for you visually. So this is giving you a crop that's excluding this foreground area, that's focusing more on these elements in the background. If you want to kind of fine-tune that a little bit, again, change your proportions, that's totally fine. You just have to press the unlock button. And then you can do a crop which is more strategic for whatever it is you're looking at. Now, this is an image, again, where you probably, when you were shooting, would want to eliminate this. You can eliminate this shape in Photoshop. We'll go over some tutorials to do that, but it's a little bit cumbersome, and this image probably isn't quite worth the effort. But again, this is non-destructive cropping. So you did this crop, you saved it like this, you press done, and then you realize, oh, that's not working for me. That's a really ugly crop, right? You have some, let me just go ahead and get rid of these XMP files. I'm just going to get rid of the view so they're less distracting. Okay, so let's go ahead and we come back to this one and think, I hate the cropping I've done there. No problem. Go ahead and just double click on it. If it was already, adjusted, it shows you there's a crop already on the image. That's a little crop icon right here. If I double click, it'll automatically bring me right back into this. Okay, go ahead and click on Camera Raw for that. Okay, back in Camera Raw. Okay, so now all I have to do is click back in the crop panel. I can just click on this crop and delete it if I want to, or I can recrop it. It goes back to the default right now, right? That crop is gone. I go ahead and say done. And now that crop has been eliminated and the little crop icon right here is no longer showing up. All right, let's try one more crop tool here. So again, back to the crop tool. This is an example of something that, probably has a little bit too much space in the bottom. You're cropped a little bit close to here. This is going to be a little bit awkward to do. This is already the aspect ratio hasn't been constrained. So at this point, you can just do whatever cropping you think is going to be more correct for this image. So we're so close here, maybe cropping in here would be a little bit more advantageous. Go ahead and press done, and the crop will be corrected. All right, now we're going to go into changing perspective. Did it again. Okay, go ahead and click on, Okay, we're back in Camera Raw. So this is an image that was shot a little bit crooked. It happens a lot. It's not the end of the world. Go ahead and click on crop right here. There's a few different ways of doing that. So right under the crop right here, we have some rotational things. We have geometry, right? So we can do some basic profile corrections. This one is just going to give us the auto. It's going to look at the image and do an auto. Let's go back. This one is just going to apply a level correction. That's going to do an auto generation of this, and it's going to be pretty good. So once that's happened, maybe you want to do some additional cropping, right? Now is when you can decide if you want to do, change a little bit the proportions where the image is, but it's going to retain it with that level adjustment right here. When I say done, it will just retain that information, right? And you can see that I've cropped this one. Here is a JPEG that has also been cropped previously. So notice with the JPEG though, right? Even though I did the edit in Camera Raw, if I go back to the Raw panel, it will record what was there before, but it's not doing it as a separate XMP file. But the advantage here, right, is that I haven't done destructive cropping. If I want to get rid of the crop I have, I can just delete it, and it brings me back to this panel. So pretty useful. Again, I could still do this, and it will give me this level adjustment, and then I could go through and do whatever additional cropping I want to the image to make it look the way that I want. When I say done, again, it's going to apply that, but it will still let me adjust it in RAW. It's changing the way I see this, right? But it hasn't actually made the change because I'm doing it in Adobe Camera Raw. Okay, so we'll do another one here. This again, the CR2 file is the Canon's version of RAW. Go to the crop. You can do an auto here for basic geometry. You can try that if you want. This is going to give you a version of this hallway. But again, the problem here is, right, if you do this, it's going to make you crop significantly into the image. So let's get rid of that crop altogether. There's a few different ways of doing this too. You can also do a rotation, right? You can do that here as well and do it manually yourself. You can scale it at the same time and scale it up to do that. So this is, again, a pretty simple way of doing this. So just this one for a level crop, that's going to give us the effect you need. And then, of course, you would have to go into it and crop this the way that you want it to look overall. Right? You're going to definitely be losing a bit of this information as you crop in. But the advantage is it's no longer giving us this very skewed view if you didn't like the skew. I think the skew is fine, but again, if you didn't like the skew, that's how you would end up doing that. There are some spot removals in this program. So this little one right here, this is for this little icon right here is the remove button. There's a few different ways of doing this. If you're already familiar with Photoshop, these should be a little bit familiar. So this is the heal button, this is the clone stamp. The clone stamp, basically, you pick an area that's similar and you paste it over the area that you want and it heals the middle. This would probably be a better example for the heal tool. And this one, you just click the area you want to remove, and it does a pretty good job with something small like that, dust on the lens or something, of removing the object you want. So you can see basically how that works. If I say done, then it's going to show me I've made an alteration right here. If I double click it again, and I click back on the tool, right? If I click here, it'll show me the visibility of this. I can toggle them on and off. It's using generative AI to do that. Again, I have the option of kind of going through that and bringing it back. I can go back to what it was before with this little option, and it gets rid of that. So again, for spot removal, if you're doing something small, this is the way to do it. If you're trying to remove large objects, you're going to do this in Photoshop. I would say Adobe Lightroom and Adobe Camera Raw, the removal tools are a little bit clunky. they're okay, but they're a little bit clunky if you're trying to do very intricate retouching or removal of objects. Otherwise, they work okay. All right, so for instance, this JPEG, let's go ahead and open this in there. Say you're trying to remove this one. Let's go back to the removal tool. Go ahead, oops, wrong one. I'm doing the mask one. Go back to the removal tool. If I do this, it's going to basically remove this area using AI. It's a pretty good job of it. But if I try to remove something bigger, right? Say I wanted to remove the boat. You'll see there's probably some areas, it's getting better all the time, but there are probably some areas here that are going to be excluded. So now with your finger still on the mouse, don't release it until you have the entire area selected that you want to remove. Now when you release it, you can also add and subtract to this if you make a mistake. Say you got a little too much sky there, we can just go ahead and remove that. If you didn't get part of the boat, you can just press add. I'm like, oh, I didn't quite get that area. We're in here. Now I'm going to click remove and we're going to see how good this works, how well this works. Right? It does okay, but if you kind of zoom in a little bit here, it's starting to get a little fuzzy through here. It's not perfect, but again, you can do this much more elegantly in Photoshop, but this is a good place to start. I'm going to go ahead and press cancel out of that. But for something like this, it's going to work great. So these, maybe you find them a little bit distracting. Go back to the remove tool. Go ahead and do the same thing we were doing before. Go over all of it and press remove. Right? That works pretty well. So this is a pretty useful way of cleaning up images. Next, this is, I know it's a JPEG, we're going to do red eye removal. This is the next one right here, which is red eye. It's pretty straightforward. You just draw around the entire eye and it removes the red eye. When you say done, you can see we've removed this one and it worked pretty effectively. So you can try some red eye in your images. Okay, now we'll go through here. Let's open this up and we are going to do masking. So we're going to do some masking for the sky. It's going to auto kind of select the sky, which is useful. And now what we can do is some exposure adjustments that are just targeting that area without affecting the rest. Especially if you have an area of sky in your photograph, this is very convenient to do. So you can do exposure and an adjustment that just affects this without affecting the rest of the photograph. Press cancel out of this and we're done. Okay, let's try it on this one as well. So we'll see how good of a job it does in auto-generating the sky. So pretty clean actually. It's getting better, the tool. There's a little bit in the mask you might want to subtract from. So let's say we'll just do the brush option through here. Let's go down a little bit in the brush. Okay, we're going to be on subtract. Oops. Yeah, subtract from the brush. And we're going to come through here, subtract a little bit of this area through here. I think also this area was kind of captured there. Okay, so now we have the size of this. You can adjust up and down. You can adjust the feather of it, right? If you're not quite getting that edge, you can kind of bring that in. I think that's pretty good. So going back to this, back to the mask, and then basically doing the same alterations again. And it's now excluding this little part of the building up here that was getting caught. So we'll pray done. Okay, so rotate, kind of already showed you that. You can rotate through here or you can rotate through here. It should be a little bit easier to do. It's not. You're going to do it through the crop panel, right? And then you have the ability to rotate it pretty easily through here. Press done. That's going to accept the change right here. Okay, sharpening. Let's go back to sharpening. All right, if you shot something out of focus, there's really nothing you can do to completely sharpen it. It's too bad. It is just sort of what it is, right? Even with maximum sharpening through here, it does get better, but it's not going to be perfect. So here you can see with no sharpening. Here we have with sharpening, right? It does affect overall, it's going to be better, but it's not going to be perfect. If you want to do more, enhanced sharpening, that's really something you're going to be doing in Photoshop. So Camera Raw can only go so far with it. It's not going to give you an out of focus photograph that suddenly looks perfectly focused. It helps, but it's not going to be quite as effective. All right, now something like this will be more effective, where it's just slightly soft, basically due to the lens. So this area in the foreground, a little bit of sharpening is actually going to help this right here. So this one, it's automatically doing about 40. You can see if I do a little enhanced sharpening through here, that's actually going to tighten that up a little bit without, degrading the quality of the photograph. So that's a pretty decent one. Noise reduction. So we're going to look at some noise reduction here. Let me go ahead and open this one up. So here's an example where even though the image was shot, it was shot at 1600 ISO, it's a little bit high anyway, you're going to have some noise. But once you go through here and do some alterations and bring up this exposure, there's going to be a lot of image noise. So let's go ahead and just boost the shadows more so you can see them. And I'm going to come through here. Now it already is going to do some automatic color reduction right here. Without that color reduction, oops, let me just zoom in a little bit more, Command plus. You can see all the color noise here. You want to zoom in to really see this in the highlight areas. So I'm going to go up just until that color noise is gone. Now luminance noise is noise that is, throughout the image and the lights and darks. So luminance noise is great, useful part of Camera Raw. Okay, so this is probably a pretty good amount of noise reduction. So I'm just going to go ahead and toggle the visibility off here so you can see the difference. So we've really reduced noise. You don't want to go too much farther with this because it'll kind of have a soft fuzzy look to it. But when I zoom out, you can see that noise reduction overall has been just dramatically improved for the image in general, even with the pretty huge adjustments we've been making in overall. A couple of things here. You'll notice also in this same panel we have these two things. This is raw details and super resolution. Super resolution is basically if you're going to be printing the image and you need to print it bigger. This basically adds additional resolution to it pretty successfully. It didn't used to be as good, but the algorithm is much better now. The next one, raw details. This is something in general, if you're doing big adjustments to your photograph like this, especially with noise reduction, this is going to help. It'll remove some of the raw artifacts that can kind of show up and create, that little appearance of texture in your photograph that shouldn't be there. So we can toggle that on and off. There's just a few little ones you'll see. It's very subtle, but overall effective. I'm going to go ahead and press done. And you can see the image has been adjusted and the noise reduction is much better. Okay, let's go down to, which one here? I'm going to do a convert to grayscale version here. Let's go ahead and open that one in Camera Raw. So there's a few different ways of doing that. You can do it in the color panel. The way you definitely don't want to do it is simply desaturating the image. There's much better ways of doing that right here. Top of the screen right here, you can see we have auto, black and white, and HDR. We're just going to click on black and white. And then once you've clicked on black and white, you have the same options through here, exposure, contrast, adjustment instead. But something else that you can do, we have this thing that now pops up called the black and white mixer. So when you use this, you can actually adjust the colors individually that come into the photograph. This can be a more convenient way of adjusting a black and white photo because you have a huge amount more control. Now, one note of caution, especially in the skies, notice this little halo that's kind of popping up around the image. It does a pretty good job of doing this adjustment, but anywhere where you have a little reflection, where you might have some color fringing on your lens, you might see a little bit of this popping up, especially right around, you know, this fringing effect that can happen around high contrast areas. So just keep an eye on that. It can be adjusted in post, but it's a bit of a pain, so it's easier just not to go that far to begin with. So you can start playing around a little bit with the black and white mixer and adjust the image by color channels. They were all recorded separately coming in. So the advantage here is you have the ability to change them all kind of coming out. So once you're done with the black and white, again, this is non-destructive. So if you decide later that you don't want this version of it, you do have the ability to go back and change that. Let's look at a couple more options here. Let's go to lens correction. Okay, so going back to this image again. So as I scroll down here, we have a few options. Right now, I want you to click on this little thing that says use profile corrections. This basically just takes any known lens faults of that lens. So say that lens, the optics of that lens are going to create a distortion, especially around edges. It basically gets rid of that kind of fisheye effect that's happening in the edge, especially if you're not going for a fisheye effect in general. So you have some options for that. This is just sort of the default right here is using that correction. You still have the option of doing this manually if you want. If all you're trying to do is this little correction and change that lens effect, that's all you have to do. If you want to do some additional work with this image, right, in terms of the optics of the image, you can also do that. So right here in the crop tool, when we go down to geometry, before we just did this one, which was apply level corrections. What we're going to do now is apply level, horizontal, and vertical perspective corrections. And that does a pretty great job, right, in getting rid of some of that information we have closing on the edge of it, especially if you shot at a bit of a strange angle, if things aren't straight up and down. This is going to go ahead and correct a lot of that information that you have there. But you still have the option, I mean, this is doing it manually, you still have the option of doing it otherwise. So let's go ahead and turn that back off. And then this is basically a guided version where you can draw the lines yourself. So for this one, right, I'm going to go ahead and click on this, and then you're going to basically draw some lines down yourself. You're going to draw guides that kind of show this, what you want the right lines to be. So we'll try one here. This door is pretty good. Let's go ahead and draw one over here for the horizon line on this side. Let's look at this door frame and add another one here. And then you can also sort of manually create these corrections that you want. So we can go ahead and clear guides. That'll get rid of all of them. But these are sort of one of the easier ways to do these kind of corrections. I'm going to go ahead and cancel out of this, and we'll do one more. So this NEF is a Nikon file. Again, so you can do just the basic lens correction right here that you want, right? So you have the off option here. Because it's a raw file, it'll be able to kind of use that profile to get rid of that. But this is still a little bit crooked. So again, we can go ahead and just do the geometry. I'm going to do this one manually, do the auto version of this and see what happens. And then of course you can do this yourself manually down here if you want to too. You have the manual transformations you can do, horizontal, vertical, etc. Or you could do this sort of little pre-done geometry corrections. So that's pretty good, I would say. Let's go back here, kind of see the effect overall. If you're satisfied, you can press done. I'm just going to go ahead and cancel out of that. Let's see. Let's try several adjustments here. So I'm going to go ahead and maybe work on this one. Go ahead and open it in Camera Raw. Right, so this one, let's try an auto. Okay, that's pretty good. Maybe you want to do a crop. Maybe try a little crop there, kind of have this be off to one side. Maybe you like the way that works. So if you kind of look down here on this side, you'll come to this little thing called snapshots. So basically, snapshots lets you make lots of different versions of the same photograph within the file, right, within the XMP file. So you don't have to make all these different versions and save them separately. So maybe you like the way this one worked as is. We're going to go ahead and under snapshots, add this new snapshot. Let's call this color correct. A little color correction there, a little cropping. Now I think, okay, this is pretty good. But I kind of want a black and white version of it. I'm going to go to black and white. I don't like how the background's working there. So let's go ahead and change some of the tones, darken up the greens a little bit. Go ahead and try some of these yellows. That's a good point here. All right, she'll do some kind of more fine-tuned adjustments on this one. And then kind of come back here. Maybe I'll increase contrast a little bit. Let's go ahead and bring the highlights back up a little bit. All right, so maybe you're satisfied with that. You can go back to snapshots. Let's go ahead and create a new snapshot. We'll call this one black and white. Say OK. So now I have these two different versions of this photograph in the same one. You can do as many different versions of this as you want. Maybe for this one you think, okay, I like this one. I want to try a different crop on the black and white. Let's go back to the crop tool. Maybe you wanted a slightly different proportion for this one. Because it was black and white, you wanted to change the way that looked a little bit. Let's go through here. All right, let's try. And also maybe you wanted to do slight difference in terms of the tones of the image overall. Let's bring the exposure up slightly. Bring down the shadow details. Whites up a little bit through here. Again, keeping an eye up here. And maybe you'll come through here. Let's add a new snapshot. This is also black and white. A different crop. All right, so you have these three versions here now. Again, you haven't created any new files. These are all versions within the same file. And you think, well, this was my favorite version of this one. I'm gonna leave it on this black and white crop version. I think that one is working the best. The one you leave it on, if I go ahead and click back here or do anything else that I say done, that is the version that will show up here. But the good thing is, if I double click on this again and open it, right, I still have all of these options and presets. Nothing has changed here, and I can still go back and edit any of them that I want and just save them and make adjustments, and I'm done. So that is pretty useful in terms of that. The next thing I would want you to do is adjusting a group. So this is sort of the last major thing we'll cover in Camera Raw. So we have a bunch of photographs which are very similar. I'm going to scroll over all of them so they're all all selected, and go ahead and press the Camera Raw button. So now that I've done these are all going to show up down here, but they're not necessarily all synced up yet. I have to select them all here as well for the program to know that I want all the changes I make to one to apply to all of them. So if I do an auto, it's going to apply to all of them. If I think all of the highlights need adjustment further down and all the shadows need adjustment up, then I have a starting place. Maybe I've already done white balance and I've selected daylight. White balance is shot. Maybe I've done a correction generally. This is especially useful if you're doing, say, a studio shoot where the lighting will be consistent. You want to make corrections to everything without having to correct them all individually. This will save you a lot of time. And now when I click out of this, I can still go back and fine-tune individual photographs the way that I want, but I'm a lot closer, right? It's not, I don't have to go through all of the steps I was doing before. So now when I say done, it will apply the changes to all of the photographs that I made in the folder, right? So Camera Raw, this is some basic place to start. I'm going to go back just a little bit here and just do some export. So the very last thing we'll do here is what to do with it now. So again, we have these options: open, done, and cancel, right? So you have the option of opening it in Photoshop and doing more work. Done just means you're done working on it here, but maybe you want to save it as something. That's right up here. So this little button, it converts and saves an image into something else. So once you click on that, it opens up this little panel. So we can save it in the same location. You can select where it's going to go. Now down here, you want to select what kind of file type it is. So maybe you want to save it as a TIFF, so it saves maximum information. Maybe you want to save it as a PSD if you're going to go and work in it in Photoshop. Or maybe you want to export it as a JPEG. So we have it as a JPEG here. Now under metadata, this is very important. If you're working in this course and you're only shooting RAW files, you need to have JPEGs to turn in on Flickr. We need to be able to see the camera data. Right here, make sure where it says all. We need to see all of the camera data with the file. Quality, you might want to do maximum, just so it's, as much information as possible for viewing. You can also do a few other things down here: output for HDR, change color space, resize the image. Don't worry about any of those things for now. This is probably the easiest panel to work with. And just go ahead and press save, and you've saved the image and you are good to go. So hopefully you will enjoy working with Camera Raw. It's a great and powerful program. We'll go over later on how to use Camera Raw with Photoshop, how to open it with Photoshop, how to work within Photoshop, and use what's called a Camera Raw filter in Photoshop to access the full things Camera Raw can do within Photoshop itself.